institutions are the people, they are the individuals. We look at infrastructure not just as space, but as the individuals, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the tech whizzes. That is what we're here for. We're here to talk about how are we moving the country forward, the continent forward, and future first. And today, a lot of the conversations are going to be challenging participants to consider the role that they play in the conditions for long-term prosperity for our country, for our continent, and for our world as well. Today is also about shaping frameworks, it's about partnerships, it's about ideas. It is a call to action. These conversations are it's not just another talk shop, but it's about a call to action. What are we taking from this? How are we moving forward for the next 65 years? Our stakeholders are here with us, captains of industries as well. And so we, again, welcome you. And we will move into the first panel very quickly. But before that, I just want to let you know about CC Productions very quickly. They are a global agency working across 3 continents and have been active in Nigeria for over a decade, working between PR and strategic communications as well. And of course, this is brought to you by CC Productions and The Guardian Nigeria. So please, can we give a round of applause for CC Productions and The Guardian Nigeria for the Nigeria Summit 2025. Thank you very much. And we're going to jump straight into the first panel because today, not just tonight, this morning, we're going to have some conversations. We'll then have some networking. We'll come back from the gala in the evening where we'll still have more conversations and a little bit more fun. And so to start today's conversation, we're going to be talking about the business of energy, infrastructure, and industrialization. And I'd like to invite our moderator, Daniel Nielsen, who is international editor for Guardian Nigeria, to come on the stage. And in this conversation, he's going to be looking at the choices, that determine how Nigeria moves forward beyond oil to diversified and sustained energy mix, and of course, infrastructure and industrial hubs as well. Please. Thank you. Our guests, I'd like to invite our first panelist, Elizabeth Kaijuka Okwenje, who is the Acting Assistant Commissioner, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development for Uganda. Thank you very much. I'd also like to invite Tim Cox, who is a partner at Control Risks, to the stage. Welcome. Dr. Natalie Bainish, who is of Circular Economy Innovation Partnership. Welcome to the stage, please. And Dr. Ahmed Damsida, who is from the principal at Faulty Technologies Limited. And take it away, Daniel. Thank you.
And you all hear okay? All good? Great, welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for everyone here joining us. Like I said, this panel, the opening one, is about the business of energy, infrastructure, and industrialization. Now, it's a sprawling title, and it's something that is very hard to define, but we're all coming at it from completely different perspectives, and that's what we want. The whole point of this summit is to look at the last 65 years of Nigeria and of Africa's place in the world, and also, but really to look ahead for the next 65 years. And kind of what are the things in place that we need, what are the challenges now that we need to combat to ensure a long-term future. And I think the choices that we make today are the ones that will affect that long-term idea. And the people in this room are the people who are going to be doing this. 65 years is a very long way away, but actually the decisions that we make and what we put in place are the ones that are going to change, that are going to make this future. So I wanted to start actually with Ahmed. Now, Ahmed is the Faulty Technologies Limited, Technologies Limited. You are on the ground, you are here, you are looking at some of the, you work across the country. What are the key challenges that Nigeria faces in terms of its kind of energy and infrastructure? Like, let's set out the problems and then let's combat them.
So thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So the challenges, depending on where you stand, at this point, they have, numerous faces. And, these challenges are moving targets, right? The challenge for today might not be the challenge you have tomorrow. Today, we have about 47 different reasons why electricity isn't stable. And someone asked me, I think it was a BBC journalist one time, said, is Nigeria's electricity problem going to be solved easily? And I said, no, it's rocket science. Why? Because the fundamentals may not be complete at once. Mm-hmm. Why? We have settlements, human settlements, that have now outgrown the capacity of infrastructure. Yeah. Case in point is, I don't know how familiar you are with Lagos, but Lekki. So Lekki was, the entire Lekki Peninsula was developed as a residential and commercial settlement, right? Now, the thinking of the industrial part of Lekki, which is down, wasn't there at the time. So the entire infrastructure, wheeling power, even the access road, even the water system, right, wasn't sized for all of this. Yeah. So how do you now resolve the issue? Do you, resettle people and have, a redevelopment? No, you won't do that, right? So the challenge, it's there as a clear challenge that cannot be solved just via policy or via redevelopment alone, mm-hmm. right? So this is very material. Mm-hmm. Now, another challenge you see as well is when you have buildings done, right? And the wiring of these buildings are not aligned with what the distribution company would have as a seamless, power supply network, right? A lot of the buildings, would have one problem or the other, and that affects the power system, and that in turn makes the distribution company experience situations where losses are huge and they have to reject power, right? Now, when you also look at large projects being developed, right? There isn't a mandatory imposition of development impact assessment. And Nigeria happens to be one of the few countries where you experience this, where there isn't a development impact assessment put out, right? Yes, there is the environmental impact assessment, there's all of that, but the development impact assessment, what it does, so a few years ago when I was leading a team at, in Uganda's project, ECOP,
coming on to a minute. Yeah.
what we did was basically to do a development impact assessment on the ECOP, showing everybody along the line where the pipeline would pass what the opportunities are. Sure. How many nails, how many carpenters, how many pipe fitters, how many, all of this, including people who sell food. Just to give you an idea of what the development impact assessment will do, it eventually iconizes the project. So this is somehow lacking here.
Okay, this is really interesting. I think what you're talking about here is, like, there are these macro issues that we need to look at, but there's also, everything happens on a much more micro level. Yes. Elizabeth, Assistant Commissioner, Renewable Energy, Ministry of Energy and Minerals Development in Uganda. Now, we've chatted before, I've interviewed you before, and we wrote a piece in The Guardian. I think Uganda's story is really, and you've been at the forefront of leading that, and again, it's that macro picture, and also with the kind of the micro, the things that are happening on the ground in smaller communities. Like, can you just give us an overview of kind of Uganda's energy infrastructure?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. What has been that journey, I guess?
Thank you for the focus on Uganda. And I'm so glad that you work there. Yes. Just a disclaimer.
Uganda Summit 2025. That's
yes. Right. So Uganda's really, our grid, it's 100% renewable. I preach renewables, but it's because our natural resources, our hydropower, 90% of the grid is hydropower, solar, biomass gasification. So and our access rate is about 60%, which is the same as Nigeria actually. And of that 60%, 40% is off the grid.
Right.
So that means that they're relying on solar home systems, mini grids. The same in Nigeria. Actually, surprisingly, the decentralized renewable energy opportunities here, it's the fastest growing sector in Nigeria, using solar and mini grids. So I think in terms of our journey, Uganda is already clean. So we actually have our first oil in 2026 next year. So although we're already green, we're not polluters. So as we transition, we're actually going to include oil and gas. But, that's to industrialize.
Right.
And then come full circle back to, clean.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Natalie here. So, Executive Director of the Circular Economy Innovation Partnership. We've twice mentioned circularity here. We've mentioned renewables. There is always this idea of, like Elizabeth and I spoke about this industrialization that does need to happen, yet a lot of the things that are happening on the ground are renewable just by their nature, because that is, what's your perspective? Where does your organization come at this? Is it is there an overarching policy? Is there this is where we should be going, or?
Thank you. Yeah, so circular economy in Nigeria, of course, energy is important to that discussion. But where we see it most important in Nigeria from an energy standpoint is first in terms of waste to energy. We see quite some work to at least, especially in Lagos State, where there's the volumes to try and build large-scale waste-to-energy projects. These are not without significant controversy and are also very, very complex to set up and expensive. So this is one area where this circular economy approach is important. And then the other in Nigeria, and I guess Africa more broadly at this moment, is really in respect to dealing with end of life and of renewable energy components, so of the off-grid solar and of wind as well, so
Okay.
those components.
And one of the overarching themes inevitably is investment in this kind of thing. And Tim, I'll come on to you in a second about this. But firstly, Natalie, you're right. Some of these projects are controversial. Some of these projects, they require investment. They're complex. They're expensive. How do you go about, who are the people funding these things? And what are the challenges that they're facing? Or what are the questions that they're asking to kind of come to invest in this country in those sort of projects?
It's a great question, and again, because we're working in circular economy in the Nigerian context, we've been primarily dealing with waste management, recycling, where we've observed there is some work that's commercial and is businesses and business models that are almost ready to be commercial, but we often see development finance playing a significant role, both in terms of structuring or supporting the research and development for building these business models.
Yeah.
In the large scale waste to energy, and also in terms of even renewable, we see, again, significant participation from the development finance institutions. We see a lot of work in terms of how to integrate things like carbon credits, plastic credits, where we're looking at recycling as well. But these are not, at this stage, commercially viable models on their own.
Okay, and Tim Cox, control risks. So you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the investors are coming to you and asking, what are the risks here? What are the problems? What are the political risks, the institutional risks? In relation to kind of energy and infrastructure, which you'll be involved in those sort of projects. What are the specific questions that are being asked, and how do you kind of overcome them, or reassure, or how do you mitigate it? How can Nigeria as a country mitigate some of these risks that are there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Shall I borrow yours?
Yeah.
Oh, is that better? There
Oh,
we go.
yeah, you're
We're online now. Yeah, look, it's very much at the intersection of what we're doing every single day, which is talking to clients and organisations that are looking to invest, either domestic organisations or international organisations, around what that risk-reward ratio looks like. And I think there's a couple of key points here. I mean, firstly, when you look at the perceived political risk in Nigeria, it is very high. It's much higher than it probably should be, and there is definitely a perception and an optics issue. When you have the president of the US tweeting about potential military intervention and hundreds of millions of dollars being wiped off the stock market overnight, you see these things playing out in most unfortunate fashion. So there's a challenge for Nigeria in terms of presenting itself effectively to the wider market and the range of investors that are open to it, who are looking to get involved in these sort of projects. But there's also a question about how effective you can be once you've gained that investment. So it's possible to get investment for almost any scheme that you can think of, but you might not like the terms that you're going to get. And ultimately, the terms that you're going to get have a critical role to play in terms of the likely success of that project. So if you're under incredibly arduous credit terms and you're borrowing in ways that are putting huge stress on the outcome of your project, it's far less likely to be successful. And so the two are intrinsically linked. Yes, you've got to have the operational execution on ground and be able to deliver, but also you've got to be able to paint a compelling picture to potential investors in order to be able to access that capital and ultimately be successful in what you're trying to do.
Okay, and Amo, back to you. I can see you now because the lights aren't shining in my eyes. Good, nice to see you. Is that kind of your experience as well? Like I say, you're on the ground. You're negotiating with investors. Is that, you know, are they the challenges that you recognise?
So, political risk for Nigeria, we don't see too much of it, right? Like the investors do. Why? Because they come with a mindset. And investors come with a mindset, and this is mostly shaped around what they gather via the media, right? And when you engage investors locally and you try to tell them that the greatest risk is actually the risk of adoption, not political risk, right? Not anything around the macro, right? It's a risk of adoption. And depending on the industry, so I'm very familiar with the energy and infrastructure industries, and this is because I've had over maybe 50 projects, that I've been involved in. And one thing that has been constant is the fact that investors, after having that mindset, also want to be 100% protected, right? And for us, we've seen that there's need to de-risk the opportunity well before these investors come in. And that de-risking path can come from maybe a catalyst fund or an intervention fund from the government, right? And without that, there might be a lot of problems. Why? Because, the lack of data, the lack of not even understanding the process. And some industries don't really have clarity around policy, right? So investors want to see those things that they're used to seeing in Germany, right? Which is not possible. So it's a bit complicated, but those who go through the process and invest money in Nigeria most often come out smiling, right? And this you can tell, with a lot of your clients, yeah?
Yeah.
So this is the benefit.
Okay, for the editor in the audience, that's the quote. And Elizabeth, from your, again, this is something that we've also spoken about, but from your position in Uganda, that kind of, those investment opportunities, those donor partnerships, is this something that, are there less conventional ways also to raise these money and kind of get these projects along?
Sure. Actually, in Uganda, the electricity supply industry is quite bankable, meaning you're assured of a return on your investment. There's the feed-in tariff, a renewable energy feed-in tariff, which is fixed. So there's predictability on that. There's, standardized documents, power purchase agreements. There are, basically it's a bankable sector. So yeah, I see it's attractive for investors. That's just for the electricity supply industry.
Yeah.
So
Is this because there's no way full capacity here? We're building up to a position where there is going to be capacity, hopefully to 100% of the population. Like, this will continue to grow. It has to.
absolutely, yeah. We have targets universal access by 2030. You know, like I mentioned, we're getting into oil and gas, so it's exponential. Like it can increase, you know,
Yeah.
until we've got full capacity and industrialized, you know, and increased demand. So yes.
And Tim, is this a story that you're telling? Like, again, we're journalists, we're storytellers. This is what we're in. Like, is this part of the story that you're telling? Like, there's a lot more opportunity here. Like, you kind of have to tell the risk, but also tell the story, I guess, and tell it in a...
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely. There's a common misconception that our industry, which is around risk advisory and risk management, is predicated on there being a lot of risk. And actually, where we spend our time is helping organizations understand the potential upside and what they could potentially gain from being involved in markets that perhaps they're less comfortable operating in, or market segments are less comfortable in operating in for various different reasons. So our business, 40 years in Nigeria, is predicated on getting organizations comfortable expanding, investing, operating in these markets. So the narrative behind that is really, really important. It comes with a couple of caveats. It comes with the caveats that you would expect to find in a very vibrant but quite challenging market economy across multiple different sectors. When we see the disruptions that sort of impact us, and some of us who have been here a while, we just sort of take this in our stride. We say, oh yes, another day, another week, this has happened again. And it can become quite sort of second nature, and it can become sort of accepted. That level of tolerance doesn't necessarily exist from external investors looking in. You have to do a lot of work to get them comfortable with that. And I think, to your point, which is a very good one, actually help them understand what are the real risks here. It's not necessarily the headlines that you're reading about. It isn't even necessarily what your risk consultants are telling you. Things come at us from strange angles. So I think a huge part of that, a huge part of our role is getting organisations comfortable with that and helping them to understand. I mean, one other point that I'd make is that we quite often encounter organisations who are starstruck by the perceived market opportunity. So they'll be looking at their global business and they'll be saying, we operate on a margin of 10% globally. We see the business in Nigeria running at 30% gross margin. This is fantastic. It's too good for us to turn down. I think the prudent investor will always look, where's that delta of 20% gone? What's happened there? And quite often you'll find that that's the money that you need to invest in sensible strategies locally, community engagement, stakeholder relations, really understanding the market, understanding those challenges and nuances in order to be successful. And I think that's the businesses that have been here and leave with smiles on their faces, as you said, they're the ones that are in it for the long game, and they recognise there are no shortcuts.
Sure. And Natalie, 2 points really. But firstly, talking about this kind of idea of storytelling, like this is, you definitely have to be telling the story in a way that is compelling and kind of gets the attention of investors, gets the attention of the government, gets the attention of the general public as well. If these are interesting things, how do you go about? Is that something that you consider from an early stage? Like, how do we tell this story, and then how do you do it?
Yeah, and I think actually to draw on the points around the data, because we do lack data in this context. We lack any headlines that people have trust in. So the stories do have to come from those successes, and I would fully endorse the points of view I've heard on this panel. There are opportunities in Nigeria. There's opportunities across Africa. They're great. These need to be, I think, celebrated more. And maybe more like a case study approach can be used to show how people can access those opportunities a bit more. That said, I think, I mean, it's a great business that, you know, we need to look at the opportunities, but there are risks. It's a completely different business environment. I mean, I'm most familiar with Nigeria,
Sure.
so really understanding the pitfalls in terms of navigating regulation, competition is also really, really important. But the storytelling does have to be from that micro level. Those successful business cases, they need more attention.
Great. And let's tell the story of the next 65 years. Like I'm teeing you up so you can have a think about it here. But this is about the next 65 years as well. You know, we have these challenges that we've outlined here. We know we have a good idea of what they are, and there's always the unexpected tweets from presidents and things like that knock things out. But Ahmed, what's the ideal scenario in 65 years? What does Nigeria's infrastructure look like? What's its, you know, is it sovereign energy? Where are we in 65 years?
Thank you very much for that. So, without talking about now, it would be difficult to see what 65 years would look like. Mm-hmm. So today, it can be volatile, it can be uncertain, it can be, you know, anything else. But the possibilities lie in the risk and challenges. If you do a lineup of all the challenges, right, what you see are more opportunities than the challenges themselves. Right? So in 65 years, it's hoped that the current challenges would have been solved, new challenges would come, and they would also be solved. And the benefit for us as Nigerians, we would have matured into a country that has become more resilient in terms of, you know, being economically productive or more economically productive. As you know, infrastructure is an economic pathway, right? Today, we don't see a lot of it, but in 65 years, when urbanization gets to its peak and exceeds its peak, and then something else starts to come in, what you will start to see is a society where, you know, the commercial part of Nigeria will probably no longer have industries. Similar to what you have in London today. You don't have factories in London, right? Mm-hmm. But 20 or 40 years ago, you had factories everywhere, right? So you will start to see this. Why? Because innovation would have, you know, reorganized the settlements. Opportunities would have been made more viable than they are today. Yeah. You would see things like cable cars, for example, because, I mean, this is a project that's been running on paper for almost 15 years today, but has not been implemented. By year 65, that would become maybe old school.
It'll move, yeah.
Of course.
No longer on a piece of paper.
And you know, the youthful population, you have what, 65% of the population under 25, right? Yeah. That alone should tell you that 65 years from now, a lot of these guys with too many things in their head, you know, would have matured and, you know, start to deliver value for society.
Sure.
Yeah. So
and Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you, and I know your area of expertise is Uganda. You are from Uganda, but what's the vision that you see for Uganda and for Nigeria? Like, what can Africa do? And one of the things that I did want to also touch upon is we also spoke about, you know, these young people, these young innovators. Yeah. Elizabeth, you and I spoke about technology leapfrogging as well. Like, you've been at the forefront of, you know, energy infrastructure and innovation for a long time. So how do you harness that and build a brighter future?
Well, first, I loved his story. I have and vision. I think I have the similar thing, and especially not just for Nigeria, for Africa, East Africa. I'm from the Pearl of Africa, Uganda. You know, it's a beautiful future. You know, we haven't industrialized yet. Yeah. It's going to have to inevitably happen. Specifically for Nigeria, from an energy perspective, I see a cleaner energy mix, you know, perhaps repurposing oil and gas for geothermal, you know, just because it has to be sustainable. The oil will be finished in 60 years. Yeah. Whereas, you know, that's just from an energy perspective. But yeah, I see a bright future.
Where is Uganda in 65 years? What are the kind of the long-term aims there?
Yeah, like I said, we basically have nature at the core. We call it gifted by nature. We have safari lands, we have the source of the Nile, we have mountain gorillas, so we're preserving that natural beauty, but also aiming to leapfrog into a modern, maybe the digital era, using AI and all these tools which can really preserve that natural environment by using high technology to advance.
Yeah. And by then you'll be the tourism director as well, I think. And Natalie, what's your, you will have a document, I'd imagine, somewhere that has your long-term vision. It probably isn't 65 years, but it's like what is your mission? What is your aim? What does Nigeria look like?
I mean, I think from a circular economy standpoint, one of the things that draws me to this concept is about value creation, and something in our interactions working across different kinds of institutions here has been that, I think partly owing to the oil and gas sector, the dominance of the oil and gas sector, there's really an extractive mindset that doesn't necessarily think about value creation or about producing public goods. And my dream for Nigeria in the next 65 years is that mind shift changes across all institutions, that it's really about value creation for the people, for the consumer. I believe that would produce the future that you've just shared, and you've just shared as well. I think that will go really a long way.
Amazing. And I'm going to pose one more question so you can have time to think about it, but it was like, what is the question that you want to ask people to do? What is the one thing that can be the takeaway? But first, Tim, what's your, for your vision of Nigeria in the next 65 years? How do you see it developing, and what's the ideal scenario I think you're on?
So first of all, 65 years is a very long time.
Yeah.
And noting some of the fundamentals of the Nigeria experience and economy, there's a huge amount of potential there, and a huge amount of potential. I think in 1960, the South Korean and the Ghanaian economies were about the same size. South Korea's economy is now 100 times the size of Ghana's.
Wow.
And a transformation of that size and scale is not unthinkable with an economy like Nigeria's. There's so much potential here. I think there are some real challenges, and we've touched on some of those here, but a key one is going to be establishing a fiscal base for which the Nigerian government can start to provide the level of services back to the economy and to society that is expected of it. And that is going to be a really big one. There's lots of different micro levers that can be pulled there, and lots of different ideas about how that can play out. But that's a really critical thing for Nigeria to get right going forwards, because if you can't establish that fiscal base, if you can't effectively tax your economy and tax your people and pay back to them in the way in which they expect, everything else struggles. All the infrastructure development struggles, the investment struggles. But I think, with a few of those sort of relatively modest changes, and we've seen some fundamental changes in the last few years. You're removed from fuel subsidies, a relatively freer floating currency relative to how it was before. These are changes that have really profound impacts on ground and have undoubtedly caused a lot of hardship for people, but equally from an overall state of the economy are considered to be a step in the right direction. And I think you start to move some of those levers, even by quite small amounts, and you get a tremendous compound benefit over that period. And it's such a long period of time, and the potential is endless.
Amazing. And like I say, there's loads of great quotes for all the journalists in here, but one of the final question is, there's people in this room from all different sectors, all different countries, who are all going to, lots of journalists, lots of storytellers. Like, what is your message to them? What is your ask to them? What can they do to help build the visions that you've just outlined? Natalie, let's start with you.
Keep believing in Nigeria and Nigerians. I think there is so much potential, and we have to keep believing in each other and supporting each other.
Great. Elizabeth, what's your...
Okay. Well, I'm just thinking Africa is the future. Really, just to look at it, and from an energy is a matter of life and death. I put it that thingy because without food, you need it for every, aspect of your life. In Uganda, the most basic need, cooking, we use, the majority are using biomass and firewood and charcoal, which is causing deforestation. So clean cooking is a huge part of our agenda. So yeah, just take care of the environment, but also use technology to harness human life and advance.
Great, Tim. What's your ask for the delegates here?
Yeah, so I think if you're speaking about journalists in general, I think keep telling your stories. Tell your positive stories, tell your inspirational stories, keep commenting on the things that are working well. Equally, don't be shy about the investigative side of journalism and then looking at shedding light on things that aren't going so well. I think the more transparency we have, that drives change, that drives things for the good. And we need both sides of that to be adequately reflected in Nigeria and to help guide the course of the Nigerian economic development story.
Amazing. And Ahmed, the Nigerian on.
So my advice would be, don't keep money in the bank on fixed deposit. Look for ideas. A lot of these young people have tremendous ideas that you can put that money in. Look for ideas that are viable, ideas that are life-changing, and invest your money in them, because keeping them in the bank doesn't actually move us forward. If you look at our total deposits today, after deduction of government deposits, you will see that a lot of the money is idle. And if you compare them with the opportunities and ideas that our young people have, you would start to wonder why. Yeah. So people should stop keeping money on fixed deposit in the bank. You invest in young people. A lot of the ideas that are life-changing can actually do a lot to transform society. Thank you.
Thank you. Ahmed, Natalie, Tim, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. You've given us amazing food for thought here and some really great quotes as well. But yeah, thank you for being such great guests on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before you run off the stage, we would like to take a photograph very quickly. Thank you so much, Daniel, for a wonderful conversation on the business of energy infrastructure and industrialization. Lots of takeaways there from economic resilience and value creation across institutions and clean energy as well. Would like to announce that T2, who is one of our partners here, our mobile network is available. So you can just open your phones and check the settings, and you see T2 mobile internet and register, and the password is your email. Wi-Fi. So you can log into T2 and you use your email as the password. Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge some of our sponsors here: Still Earth Holdings, MasterCard, Quantum Zenith, LIRS, 7up, Sterling Bank, TMDK Group, Mikano, and T2. And there's going to be lots of networking after our second panel as well. So please don't run anywhere. There'll be coffee and tea and an opportunity for you to meet, connect, and collaborate as well. Thank you. Thank you again to all our guest panelists. I would like to invite one of our sponsors and partners, Still Earth Holdings. I'm going to invite Mr. Ken Chendo, who is the GMD Group Business Development of Tyrex Petroleum and Energy. Thank you.
Testing. Hello? Hello? Your Excellencies, captains of industry, development partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a distinct honor and privilege to address this esteemed gathering on behalf of my executive chairperson, Ms. Oyindamola Lami Adeyemi, and on behalf of a visionary brand whose strategic foresight, unwavering commitment, and transformative impact have continued and will continue to shape the trajectory of states and nations across Nigeria and the African continent. I stand here before you today to convey her message, her passion, and her unwavering belief that this is a defining moment in Nigerians' development story. A moment that calls for bold ideas, strategic partnerships, and decisive execution. The theme of her message, Still Earth and the Business of Energy, Infrastructure, and Industrialization, reflects not just the focus of this summit, but also the core of my executive chairperson's mission: to build an enterprise that powers sustainable growth, strengthens local capacity, and drives Nigeria's industrial transformation. Under her leadership, Still Earth Holdings has evolved into a dynamic ecosystem of business at the intersection of energy, infrastructure, and finance, a model designed to catalyze industrial growth and national prosperity. As our executive chairperson often reminds us, challenges are simply opportunities in disguise, invitations to innovate and transform. Nigeria's infrastructure deficits, estimated at over $3 trillion in the next 30 years, represents one of such defining opportunities. Our energy supply continues to lag behind national demand. Our roads, though improving, still impede trade and productivity. And our financing ecosystem remains too shallow to support the aspirations of our entrepreneurs. But in the view of my executive chairperson, these are not insurmountable obstacles. There are avenues for strategic intervention, guided by innovation, local expertise, and strong partnerships. She firmly believes that energy, infrastructure, and finance are not separate challenges, but interconnected pillars that must be developed together. This conviction forms the foundation of the Still Earth approach. Through the guidance and visionary leadership of Ms. Oyindamola Lami Adeyemi, Still Earth Holdings has deliberately been structured to deliver integrated, sustainable solutions across key sectors of the economy. Our subsidiaries, Tyrex Petroleum and Energy, Still Earth Construction, and Still Earth Capital Finance, work in synergy to power industrial growth and economic inclusion. Tyrex. Under the chairperson's leadership, Tyrex has become the vanguard of our energy business. In less than 5 years, Tyrex has successfully drilled 36 wells in Nigeria's oil and gas sector, an extraordinary milestone for an indigenous company in a space long dominated by international operators. Each well represents more than a technical success. It reflects the chairperson's commitment to expanding local content and job creation, driving technology transfer and knowledge retention, and strengthening national capacity for upstream operations. Guided by her forward-thinking energy vision, Tyrex is expanding beyond oil and gas into renewable and hybrid energy solutions, aligning with Nigeria's energy transition goals and ensuring that our growth remains both sustainable and future-oriented. Still Earth Construction. My chairperson's strategic insight recognizes that no industrial economy can thrive without strong physical infrastructure. Under her direction, Still Air Construction has executed transformative road, civil, and structural projects across Nigeria, including state highways, bridges, educational facilities, and industrial developments. These are not just construction projects, they're enablers of industrial productivity. Roads that connect production zones to markets, facilities that support industrial clusters, and schools and training centers that prepare the next generation of engineers and builders. Each project reflects her belief that infrastructure is the bedrock of industrialization and human progress. Still Earth Capital Finance. At Still Earth, we understand that without access to finance, no enterprise, large or small, can thrive. Through Still Earth Capital Finance, Ms. Oyindamala has championed a mission to democratize access to credit for individuals, entrepreneurs, and small businesses. From asset financing for logistic operations to equipment loans for artisans, the chairperson's vision ensures that finance becomes an instrument of empowerment, driving productivity, creating jobs, and building inclusive prosperity. This integrated model, drilling the wells, building the roads, and financing the growth, is a reflection of a strategic genius and a commitment to solving systematic challenges through synergy. On behalf of our executive chairperson, I extend a compelling invitation to investors and policymakers alike. Nigeria's energy and infrastructure sectors represent Africa's next frontier, driven by scale, policy supports, and indigenous capacity. Under her stewardship, Still Earth Holdings offers a proven platform with over 36 wells delivered, multiple infrastructure projects completed, an expanding finance portfolio that supports inclusive growth. To our policymakers, her message is clear. Industrialization cannot be achieved by government or private sector alone. It requires partnership, policy consistency, and long-term capital. She urges for an enabling environment, one that rewards performance, protects contracts, and accelerates development finance, so that together we can unlock Nigeria's full industrial potential. Ms. Oyindamala firmly believes that collaboration is the new currency of development. Still Earth Holdings seeks not just projects, but transformational partnerships with energy companies seeking reliable indigenous operators, governments requiring trusted infrastructure partners, financial institutions looking to expand productive credit, and development agencies committed to measurable impact. Her leadership philosophy is clear. When we build together, we rise together. So in conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our executive chairperson, I reaffirm that the business of energy, infrastructure, and industrialization is not the work of tomorrow, it's the mission of today. Through her vision of stewardship, Still Earth Holdings has proven that Nigerian enterprises can deliver world-class projects, foster inclusive financing, and drive industrial transformation. But as she often says, we're only at the beginning of what is possible. Her ambition is to drill hundreds of wells, build entire industrial corridors, and finance the growth of thousands of small businesses, which is the true heartbeat of the Nigerian economy. The opportunity is before us. The capacity exists. The leadership is present. And the time is now. Let us partner for progress. Let us build together. Let us make Nigeria's industrious future a reality today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ken Chendu, from our sponsors, Still Earth. I have to hold the two microphones now. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, can we do a little temperature check? You know, I know that at conferences we can get a little stiff sometimes. How are we feeling? Good morning. I know we haven't given you coffee yet. I promise we will. Okay, good morning. Thank you. Welcome back. We're moving into our next conversation of the Nigeria Summit. And Daniel is going to be, we're putting him to work here today. Our next conversation is about the business of finance, technology, and the digital economy. And we're really asking, how do we shape an ecosystem where fintech, banking, and digital transformation can create trust, scale inclusion, embed resilience, and building a digital economy that endures through generations as well. As we've been saying, we're talking about shaping the next 65. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Many of us are not going to be here, but it really starts with us, you know, to start that work of the future, of future making, so to speak. So I would like to invite Daniel back on stage, because, you know, he's going to be cheering these riveting conversations. I would like to invite our panelist, Retired Honorable Mark Simmons, Chairman, Invest Africa Advisory Board. Welcome. I'd like to invite Nwana Isang, who is the VP and Principal Consultant Services at MasterCard. Marie Ukpere, Acting Group Managing Director, Quantum Zenith. And Ina Alogu, who is the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer. Welcome. And Daniel, it's over to you.
Great, thank you. I was just doing the maths, and I'm definitely not going to be here in 65 years. But we can certainly set out the future for this. So this panel, this is about finance, technology, and digital economy. Again, another kind of wide-reaching title, but I think the messages hopefully will be similar. Just a note on the last panel, I noticed as we were all getting off the stage, there were connections happening right in front of our eyes. They knew people, they were connecting, they had already arranged another meeting by the time we got off the stage. So this is what we're here for. It's making these connections and making these stories. So so the business of finance, technology, digital economy. We have lots of kind of young innovators here who are rewriting the rules of finance and technology. And I think one of the things that we find often in countries like Nigeria and other countries across the continent is that, especially with kind of the fintech industries, it is leapfrogging ahead beyond what is happening in Western Europe and the US because of the different needs and necessities. So joining us, yes, we've got the Right Honourable Mark Simmons. Mark is the chair of the Invest Africa Advisory Board. Who's also Foreign and Commonwealth Office Minister with responsibilities for Africa. I served as a Member of Parliament in the UK for 14 years in a constituency very close to where I was born, and has also chaired the UN Security Council, which I expect this to be much easier for me anyway. But Mark, thank you for joining us. we've also got Unwana, the Principal Services Business Development MasterCard. Is that correct? Have I got that right? Yeah, okay, good. So welcome. And also Ina Alogu. Excuse my pronunciation. The Chief Digital Officer and Innovation Officer at T2, who are also supporting. So I guess in the flip side, I think what we want to do here is set out the picture overall, and let's set the vision first, and then come back on the challenges. Let's flip it on its head. So, Ina, I'm going to go to you first. You know, you're in innovation. You're at the forefront of innovation in this kind of digital transformation space. Like, where do you see Nigeria heading? Where is it in the next 65 years? And then we'll come back and sort out all the challenges.
All right. 65 years, just like one of the speakers from the previous panel had said, is a really, really long time. Mm-hmm. Especially when you live in a world where things can change very quickly in as little as 6 months. Yeah. But I think generally, in terms of where Nigeria is heading with regard to digital transformation, I would say that when you look at the African countries that have, at least from a government policy perspective, driven support for the startup industry that supports digital transformation generally. I would say Nigeria, in my view, took a little longer than expected. Okay. Of course, if you see what's going on in Rwanda, what's going on in Ghana, and some other African countries, they found that as a country, for them to move forward in terms of the economy, they need to have a very vibrant technology industry. But I do think Nigeria has finally seen the need to provide some sort of support, whether from the private sector or from the public sector, to have a very thriving startup economy, a very thriving digital economy. And if you just look at the news, you'd see that several government agencies now have some sort of digital initiative that they're pushing in every single government sector that you find. So what I suspect would happen is two things. One is from the public sector, you start to see more support coming from government agencies in terms of how they interact with the private sector to drive innovation and the growth of digital, as it may seem, to solve certain problems within the economy. And I think also from the private sector perspective, there is a shift in the mindset of incumbent companies whose operations predates the digital era. And that shift is one where they are now believing more in co-opetition than competition. Okay. Because what used to happen is that the incumbents used to see the startups as a big threat. And they used to think about their business as one that is finite and one that is winner takes all. But we are now starting to see an increased collaboration between, established incumbent companies with startups who are very agile and very innovative, and they're collaborating together to, unlock opportunities that ordinarily would have been very difficult to do if they're trying to do it on their own.
Okay, amazing. And Unwana, I'm going to come to you because obviously you work for MasterCard. It's a big global player, but it's also having to, you are interacting with kind of startups and innovation teams and that kind of thing. Like, where does the role of a global player like MasterCard, what's their role in developing the digital transformation in Nigeria for the long-term future?
Yeah, thanks. So the truth is, there are two things. There's digital transformation, and then there's the question around how to sort of scale that transformation and those transformational tools, right, across the economy. Obviously, preferably from a bottom-up perspective, right? So at MasterCard, I would say the first thing we've really recognized and realized is that sustainable scale and scalability is best driven through ecosystem partnerships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is something we are very huge on, right? So working with the right partners across, various sectors and industries. So for example, in the particular space we play in, which is in financial services, we've got several partnerships with banks, we've got several partnerships with fintechs, with the government, and with other regional sort of players. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So for example, in the fintech space, we're partnering with people like Alezo and a couple of other companies in that SME space are focused on really helping small businesses get sort of visibility into their cash flows. And why that is important is that one of the biggest problem statements for growing SMEs is access to finance. And one of the key blockers is the invisibility of their cash flows in terms of from a lending perspective. So when you're able to enable, when you then can enable SMEs to have visibility into what their cash flows are, it makes it easier for them to access finance and then, grow and scale. So those are some sort of the,
Got it. And so Mark, coming on to you. So I guess as your role in Invest, with Invest Africa, like the question of this ecosystem is all important, as have been outlined by the other two panelists. What's their perspective on the ecosystem? How should that be developing across Africa, and how does that kind of chime with your future vision?
So the ecosystem is critical, but I just want to make 2 or 3 slightly different points, although whilst I agree with my panelists. The first is that macroeconomic stability is very important to persuade investment to come into both Nigeria and Africa, as is political stability. And I'll come on to why specifically that's the case in a moment. Secondly, it is becoming increasingly competitive on the African continent as to where technology investment, collaboration and partnerships will go. And if I'm honest, I think Nigeria has been a little bit slow in being at the forefront, which you should be, from other competitors. So there are countries like Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, South Africa, Botswana, Kenya, Rwanda, all who believe they're going to be the IT digital economy hub for the continent. And Nigeria, because of your population, the entrepreneurial flair that you have, the dynamism and energy, should also be within that top group. But there's still work that needs to be done to ensure that Nigeria is there. Now, I'll just give you one statistic that I think makes this stark, is that Nigeria in 2024 got $300 million of foreign direct investment coming into Nigeria in the total economy. And Algeria got 1.2 billion. Egypt was many, many times that. And then if you look at a country, not in Africa, but someone like Indonesia, who received $55 billion of foreign direct investment going into their economy, with a smaller population than Nigeria. So why is there that disparity? Part of that is regulatory, part of that is reputation, part of that is negative media coverage, which was mentioned rightly in the previous panel. So whilst progress is being made, there's still a huge amount of work to do in Nigeria. And I think, to be fair, the current Nigerian government has made some correct steps. They are moving in the right direction in macroeconomic policy. But there's also more to be done, because the digital economy and everything that flows from that, which will benefit consumers, businesses, the industrial sector, but also governments. So, for example, technology now exists to enable people to be taxed automatically from transactions that take place that needn't touch any, just go straight into the treasury. So there is no way that any inappropriate activity can take place and those funds could be misused. I believe that the Nigerian government should be at the forefront of implementing that sort of technology to give it the revenue to enable it to build the social infrastructure, schools and hospitals and roads that we all want to see.
I mean, a fascinating and a slightly terrifying statistic there. Ina, is this? That really is a big, shocking statistic. Is it something that you know, as somebody who is, you know, 42, is this problematic, kind of getting this investment into the country? Are you seeing challenges when you want external investment?
Yes, and it's such an important point you brought up. And let me give you a different perspective to show you how things have changed and how it is imperative for Nigeria to do a lot more to encourage foreign direct investments. So incidentally, I've been involved in startup building programs in the past, incubators, accelerators, and so on and so forth. And so what we found was, if you look at the investments that came from VCs, venture capitalists, and private equity investors, just before we hit what we call the investment winter in 2000 and shortly after 2012, I think between 2012 and 2020, just before 2022, between 2021 and 2022, what happened was globally startup equity investments peaked and started declining. But what happened was Africa peaked in 2022, even when globally startup equity investments were declining. People thought Africa was an exception, but what was really happening was that there were some deals that dragged on into 2022, and it seemed as if Africa was still on the upward trajectory. But generally, startup equity investments declined globally. But before that investment winter, Nigeria had the highest amount of investments coming from VCs and private equity firms. Between 2023 and 2024, when investments started going back up, if you look at the African countries that received the most investments, Nigeria was no longer number one. And the question is why? So two things happened. When VCs invest in a startup, they're actually investing in the future. They're investing in your potential to become very profitable or of having better valuations so that they can get a good ROI. And so what they've looked at is what is impacting startups' abilities to be able to build a sustainable business. And the conditions for startups in Nigeria, even though globally, most African countries have experienced issues with foreign exchange, which has made, and things like inflation, which has made life for startups very difficult. But if you look at how many startups are going out of business in Nigeria compared to other African countries, the future looks bleaker for Nigerian startups. And so what then needs to happen for Nigeria to regain back its position as the number one destination for private equity or for startup equity investments is that the environment for startups to operate and build a sustainable business needs to be improved for investors to have confidence with investing in Nigerian startups again.
Sure. And Unwana, this is a question that, you know, you and with MasterCard is also very important. Like, how do you, as a company like MasterCard, how do you build up that trust and resilience for these digital systems and these kind of financial systems?
Well, the first thing that's important to really understand is that trust is built on transparency, accountability, in terms of the fact that when you do a transaction, there are clear accountabilities around the consummation of that transaction end to end, right? So when you have trust, when you have transparency, when you have accountability in that transaction flow, that when you replicate that in a systemic way, that begins to build trust, right, in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now, fun fact, MasterCard has been involved with artificial intelligence, AI, for almost 20 years. We started our AI journey in 2007.
Which is 19 years longer than me.
And one of the key use cases that led us to that investment was in securing transactions, in securing payments. And that has grown into a significant part of our solution set for in all the economies we play in. Now, when you're able to then make that available, you know, in a very ubiquitous way, across channels, across platforms, you lower barriers to those sorts of solutions that typically would come at a very high cost, but you democratize that. What that then does is that it makes secure transactions, secure business environments more regular and more normal. So really at the end of the day, it's about making sure that we normalize access to secure transactions on a day-to-day basis across channels and across businesses. And we've seen quite a number of small businesses, which is a passion point for us from a MasterCard perspective, really take this on and run with it. One more thing I'd like to say is we also invest significantly in bringing together ecosystem players. So recently we had what we call cyber crisis simulation exercises in Nigeria and in Ghana. And what that was we invited the regulators, we invited the banks, we invited payment processors into a room to say, this is the current state of play in terms of cybersecurity, cyber resilience, and all the tools that are necessary to make that ecosystem a lot safer. And once we have strong alignment across those dimensions, it makes things a lot more easier. So those are the sorts of investments, the sorts of actions that we've been taking.
Sure. Do you want to chime in? Yeah. Yeah, it is. This on?
Yeah, hello. So I think you make an excellent point about cybersecurity, but of course one of the both challenges but also opportunities of the digital economy is that it goes beyond traditional geopolitical boundaries. So there needs to be coordination, both in security terms but regulatory terms, across, let's just say, the whole of West Africa. The Nigerian policy needs to be aligned with the African Free Trade Agreement to facilitate cross-border transactions. But that sounds rather policy wonkish and bureaucratic. But on the other side of that same coin, it creates huge opportunities for Nigeria, because not only the energy and dynamism that you have as a people, but all of the outside of what I call the sort of normal economic investment criteria, the huge talent you have in music, in literature, in art, in fashion, in films, all of that you can use digital platforms to sell, not just across the African continent, but to a global audience that has a huge appetite for what Nigeria has to offer, therefore generating economic development, wealth, sustainable jobs here in Nigeria, which could become a cultural powerhouse, not just for the continent, but for the rest of the world. But there's a danger in all this. And if I could just make, Daniel, just one point about the challenge. The digital economy is fine, but we haven't mentioned yet, artificial intelligence is coming down the track extremely fast. What is the challenge behind that is that within the next 10 years, even the most traditional jobs, whether it's added value in the agricultural sector, the textile sector, it's likely that those jobs which we in the West use to industrialize our countries will not be possible to do on the African continent, because technology and robotics will have taken over those basic tasks. And the point of that is where countries will become competitive is not the historic cost of labor, but the up-to-date cost of capital, which is why macroeconomic stability and responsible macroeconomic performance, i.e. running the economy with low interest rates, providing affordable capital from the finance houses in Nigeria, will become increasingly important.
Agree.
Very clear. Yeah, I can see you're both nodding along with that, Ina. That's something that you've recognized. Like, what's it like on the ground here in Nigeria?
So, I mean, he's absolutely spot on. And that's one of the things I had in mind when I said creating an enabling environment for startups to be able to build sustainable business. But let me even speak to, from the startups perspective, what they need to do to be able to build a sustainable business, and also with corporates like ourselves who are incumbents whose, like I previously said, our operations predates the digital era. Now, one of the challenges I've working with founders that I've always seen is two things. One is that when a founder decides to launch a business, a startup business, one of the challenges they typically have is they fall in love with the solution without fully understanding the problem. And so what I always tell any founder is that for you to build a sustainable business, what your focus should be on is fully understanding the problem. And it requires you to look at opportunities from a different perspective. When you look at people posting, young people posting on social media, all they talk about is problems, problems, problems. But you can take somebody else who doesn't see it as a problem but sees it as an opportunity and takes time to study that problem to be an opportunity to build a solution to address. And in terms of a mindset shift, that's one of the things that founders need to start to do in Nigeria. So it is all about understanding the why, and the why has to do with what is the problem, what are the underlying causes of the problem before you start thinking about what solutions to build to solve those problems. From the perspective of the incumbents, two things are very critical because most times people mistake the challenge that startups face to be access to just capital. That's not the only problem. They need access to mentors, they need access to partnerships to help them access markets that they ordinarily would not have the resources to be able to unlock. And so one of the things I'm challenging corporates to look at is, one, understand your strengths and your weaknesses. You can never be as agile and as innovative as the startups. So stop trying to be. And the best approach, in my view, which is what we're doing at T2, is to find collaborative opportunities and don't see this as a finite game where there's a winner takes all and you see all startups as competitors. See them as partners that you can build to create more value and understand that the market is big enough for everybody to, have something to feed on. And so you need to look at it from that perspective. The second perspective is every accomplished individual seeks to give back some way. And I think corporates need to start doing the same. So you went through the same journey that the startups went through. So I think from a give back perspective, you need to do something to support startups. So it's not just partnering with them, but also, creating some sort of fund to help support the startup ecosystem. And that's the way we can work with startups collaboratively to build a very vibrant digital economy, in my view.
Sure. And when you're helping them for a company like MasterCard or another kind of globe that it benefits everybody. I could see you also nodding along. Right? How do you work with these smaller companies to enable capital movement to kind of help them see the kind of the vision and run their fiscally responsible businesses? Yeah.
So again, it's like I said, we don't believe that sustainable scale can be achieved, singularly or alone. So for example, we work with the African Development Bank and through the AMAID program, and the aim there is to upscale and connect 100 million individuals and businesses over the next 10 years across the African continent to opportunities. We also have a program we call Start Path, which is almost like an accelerator for small businesses, and we invest significantly in that. The idea there being growing them from inception, basically from startup, connecting them with opportunities and to other ecosystem players that can enable and catalyze their growth, giving them the tools, right? The solutions, the systems to be a lot more efficient, be a lot more impactful in terms of, how they grow their businesses and how they penetrate their target markets. And just make sure that in terms of just their transaction flows, they play in a safe environment, like I spoke about before, making sure that their payments are transparent, there's accountability around it, there's security around it. And when you have that sort of cocktail of support, it helps, the small businesses grow. And this is replicated right across the continent.
Yeah, okay. And Mark, come back to you, especially, I guess, is your role as chair of the Invest Africa Advisory Board. Is that something that you're also trying to facilitate? Like, what's your mission? How are you bringing that ecosystem together across Africa? Like, how are you working with individual companies and enabling that?
Yeah, so just very quickly, Invest Africa is a a membership organisation that has about 450 members worldwide, both in Africa and across the world. And we hold over 100 events a year, many of them online, 2 big ones in person, one in London and one in the UAE and Dubai, with the ever-increasing volume of capital wanting to come from the Emirates into Africa. And we try and put investors together, and we try and make sure they're investing in secure and responsible businesses. But there's a huge appetite for investing in technology, and there's a huge appetite for investing in Nigeria. And it goes back a little bit to what I said earlier, that there is it's sometimes a misplaced perception about Nigeria. I think there is also sometimes a misreporting by some of the media about what Nigeria is like. And so you go back to the question you asked the previous panel. I think the media has a job to do to report positive things happening in Nigeria, of which there are so many that I don't think we can't obviously go into all of that this morning. So I think it's incumbent on the media to do that. But I don't know how long we've got left of the panel. I would just say there are 3 things that I would urge Nigeria itself to focus on for the next 65 years. And this is my advice. Obviously, it's up to Nigerians to determine themselves what the priorities should be. The first is power, getting power to every single Nigerian in a sustainable, reliable, consistent way. Second is education, particularly education of girls and women, to enable girls and women to participate in a modern 21st century economy, because that will bring huge benefits and huge economic drivers in itself. And the third is the rule of law, and the same law for everyone. So that will then give confidence that commercial investments, if there are disputes, will be resolved in a sustainable, independent, proper, focused way, but also that people will have the confidence that they will be treated the same as every other person in this country. And that's I think significant progress has been made in the last 65 years, but there's more to do.
Amazing. Thank you. And look, what's your ask for the next 65 years?
What's my what?
What's your ask for the next 65 years?
My ask.
What are you going to ask the delegates and the people you're going to meet this evening? And how are you going to...
I have a lot of asks, but let me just focus on what I think is the most important one. So if I'm looking at creating an enabling environment for startups to thrive and companies who are innovating to thrive, I will look more, and I'm hoping that we have people from policymakers in the audience, or people from the regulators of different sectors in the audience as well. I think the first thing that Nigeria needs to recognize that as a country we will not be able to compete sustainably if we don't have a thriving digital economy. That much is clear. And a couple of African countries have recognized that and are actively doing what they can to support their digital economy. And he had mentioned what's happening in Morocco. I was in a conference in Morocco recently, and I was amazed about how much the Moroccan government had invested in creating visibility for the startups to partner with, attendees from other African countries as well. Right. And I think Nigeria needs to do a lot more around that. From a regulatory perspective, one of the biggest threats to a thriving startup business is the changes in the regulatory environment. Sometimes those changes bring unintended consequences, not outcomes that the regulator had intended from the get-go. But I think from a regulatory perspective, one of the things that has happened with regulators all around the world is, as we saw a proliferation of startups, there was a period of confusion as to how to regulate these people. Do we regulate them the same way we regulate the incumbents? And I think in some countries they figured out that they need to create a separate regulatory regime for the startups and also include them in the process of coming up with regulations so that they reduce the impact of unintended consequences. So from a regulatory approach, I think that that's something that regulators in Nigeria need to do a lot more. Be more inclusive and get the startups to sit at the table where those decisions are being made so that they can raise any concerns that a particular regulation may probably, bring up in terms of how they are able to continue to innovate. And also take a cue from other countries who have found a way to create a very good regulatory regime that does not stifle but promote innovation, but still achieves the objectives of what regulation intends to achieve. That would be my ask.
Amazing, interesting. Just by the way, my next question is going to be, what's your headline takeaway from this? But
Okay.
Unwana, I'm going to come on to you. Like, what's your ask for the next?
Yeah, so it's amazing how very much aligned I am with my fellow panelists, right? So the case has been made around how strong the growth imperative for Nigeria and Africa is. The case has been made around how strong that growth potential is. The case has also been made around, putting in place a more inclusive approach to policy making and having a lot more of stability and strategic intent around just that policy environment and the direction of travel in terms of our strategy and policy. What I would add to that is the need to change our policy making and regulatory philosophy from being a bit more prescriptive, being maybe a bit siloed, to the philosophy around co-creation. So how can regulators, players in the industry at various levels come together and co-create the future that we want?
Yeah.
So that it's not a top-down sort of, voice from above, approach, but more bottom-up and more inclusive in terms of, taking into account the perspectives of all players. And by the way, why that is very important is, if you look at Nigeria and almost every economy, 90% of the businesses in Nigeria are SMEs. Mm-hmm. Almost half of Nigeria's GDP is SME driven. Mm-hmm. A vast majority of the workforce in Nigeria is from the SME sector.
Yeah.
But at the tables, in the rooms where the regulations and the policies are created that would impact significantly this segment of the economy, there's not enough representation.
Sure.
So my ask is, a pivot to a more co-creative driven thinking and approach to policy making and regulation.
Amazing. And like I say, I did give you a bit of warning on this question, but the idea of this summit, that we're here and we're talking now, but this has a long tail. We will be reporting on this with CT Productions and The Guardian as well for a while. So, and obviously we like to distill everything into a headline. What's your one takeaway from the conversations that we've had on this panel today, Mark?
I would say, to summarize, I would say that the digital economy is going to drive Nigeria's economic growth for the next period. I won't put a specific number of years on it, but for the next period. And if the natural Nigerian energy, entrepreneurial flair and ambition can be plugged into that digital and technological revolution, then Nigeria will be at the forefront, not just of continental African economic growth, but of global economic growth.
That is definitely the headline we want. Ina?
All right, I think my key takeaway maybe perhaps isn't something that would extensively discuss, but we touched on it in the course of our conversation, is a message to incumbents. When I say incumbents, established companies who have been around for a while. Every single incumbent company is experiencing some sort of disruption. And my recommendation to any corporate entity sitting in the audience here is the best approach to being able to deal with disruption and being able to speed up your ability to become agile and innovate is to partner. And you need to recognize that what got you success to where you are is not going to take you into the future.
Yeah.
Business models are changing. Co-opetition is replacing competition. External innovation is replacing internal innovation. So all of those old practices don't work anymore. So you need to look around and see the changes around you and stop being stuck in the old ways of doing things. I'd encourage corporates to partner more, not just for their survival, but from a value creation perspective, the best way to ensure that we create value and take Nigeria to the next level in terms of how customers and citizens are deriving value is to get better partnerships between the incumbent companies and the startup ecosystem.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. And
So I would say, let's not fear disruption. And Ina has made the point. I mean, we all face it even in our daily lives. And the truth is, it's already baked in. It's a reality that is here to stay. Disruption is our daily reality. And so, for me, the thinking from corporate players and even from personal perspective is embrace it. Don't fear it. Disruption is not your competitor. Your ability to embrace change and run with it is actually the catalyst you need to grow into the next phase and sustainably, maintain your relevance, in the future to come, both on a personal level and at a corporate level. Thank you.
brilliant. Unwana, Ina, and Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Enlightening and very, very eloquently put. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Daniel. Please give our panel a round of applause. If you just stand up for photos. Thank you again, Daniel, for a wonderful conversation. This panel seemed very optimistic as well. Lots to take away from regulatory reform to inclusive policy to dealing with the rule of law, power and girls as well. This evening, we're going to be having conversations around the business of culture and women in leadership. So it's still going to be a very interesting day with lots of important conversation, important takeaways, and call to actions as well. So I'd like to recognize our sponsors here for the Nigeria Summit 2025. We have Still Earth Holdings, MasterCard, Quantum Zenith, LIRS, 7up, Sterling Bank, Meccano, T2. We did say T2 is also providing us with Wi-Fi in the building, so both this afternoon and this evening as well, there will be barcodes that you can scan. Right now, you can just look for the T2 Wi-Fi network and register using your email as the password. We also have TMDK Group as one of our sponsors too. And of course, Nigeria Summit 2025 is brought to you by CT Productions and The Guardian Nigeria. We're very excited to have you with us. We're going to open up to some coffee and networking and just connecting, because I think this is the bigger and more important part of the day. And then this evening, we'll reassemble here at 5 o'clock. We'll be having it's going to be a bit more fancy. And we'll be having what we like to call our gala, and we'll be having some more panels. We'll be hearing from the End of the World 2025 as well. We'll be having some keynotes. It's going to be a fun evening, a fun night. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to just please give yourself a round of applause. Thank you very much for spending the morning with us. Coffee and tea will be open very soon. So if you can just, interact with each other, that will be wonderful. My name is Wana. I am your host for the rest of the day, really. So I hope you don't get tired of me. Well, you can't, really. But I'll be here with you throughout today. Thank you very much.